So, tonight, we're almost finishing up. Next week, we'll have 2 chapters that are not as long. They're only 10 pages, I think, in the last 2 chapters. And then we're going to move into Module 3, which is why I ordered $500 worth of Bible studies. So, what we're going to do in Module 3 is we're going to learn how to integrate the Bible studies. So everything you learned in the Wheel of Faith, I have a set of Bible studies that are being edited now. They should be done by the end of the week. And then I'll have those for download. I'm not going to print them because that's a lot. But there's 10 Bible studies, and you'll be able to download those. I'll bring some samples up here, and we're going to learn where to integrate them into the doctrinal, because we have to have the doctrinal. The world is so confused. We need historicals of prophecy, or if you've got your own amazing facts you want to use, you're welcome to do that too. So we're going to learn how to integrate, at what point to bring which lessons in, but we're also going to learn how to make the lesson to really make it more Christ-centered. Not that Doug Batchelor doesn't do a good job, he does, but we're going to learn how to just maybe bring out more of the gospel and let them have more of their own experience with the doctrinal. Because the doctrinal is so self-explanatory, you really don't even need to be there with somebody with one of these. If they're really a good student, they're going to read it on their own and get it without you there, even. So the idea is to find the points that are the most sticking points and hone in on that, and then bring out the gospel elements. So we're going to learn how to do that. That's not going to take us a lot of time. And in Module 3, we're also going to be learning how to, I'm going to give you all Bible texts, Bible stories, and you're going to learn how to find the gospel in that text and in that story. You're going to be your homework, and then we'll come back and talk about what you found, what you discovered. And then you're going to, this is where Module 4 is going to come in. This is only if you want to. Y'all all don't have to do that, but we're going to have put your own sermon together based on different Bible gospel texts. And then we're going to have Friday nights for a while. Open mic. You can share your 20-minute, 30-minute sermon, probably about 15 or 20 minutes. You can share it so that you just kind of get used to preaching the gospel. Or if you don't want to preach the gospel, you're at least going to learn how to teach it, because I'm telling you, pretty soon it's all hands on deck. Everyone's going to be doing this. There's going to be so many requests and so many people wanting this truth. There's no way one man can keep up with that. And so the idea is to have y'all ahead of the curve, and hopefully you're already out there reaching somebody. Out of all of y'all, if there's got to be at least 20 people of all the friends and family and co-workers that y'all represent. That's a good number of people. If everyone has 5, usually they say everyone has within their circle of influence about 12 people, somewhere between 5 and 12 people that we have a direct influence with. Out of those, you take 12 times everyone taking this course, and there's about 70 people taking it. That's a good number of people, and out of all those people, I have to believe there's got to be a group of people ready to be baptized, ready to take the Bible studies, ready to learn the gospel. And so if y'all are learning to do that, as time grows closer and closer to the end, I know that some people are like, oh, it's not really the end yet. Well, it's getting there. They always say that, but no, it's really getting there. You cannot mistake this. I've been waiting for these things since I was a young man. And yet here we have the Roman Church at the head of the world's greatest thoughts right now. Rome leading out in economical discussions on bringing the world together. Rome leading out in environmentalism. Rome leading out in bringing the world together as one so we quit hating on each other. It's right here in front of our face. I mean, it's absolutely right here, and we are just asleep at the wheel as a people. We're like, oh, well, we've been hearing that forever. Not like this. And to look at the issues within Adventism, which is other plane of thought. When you look at what we're told the church would look like prior to the second coming of Christ, man, we are there. The division is in total rebellion against the world church. And if you look at some of the things happening to Andrew, some of the things the professors and teachers are just laying out there, it's heresy. I hate to say it, you get fired for that, but that is the truth of what's going on. Amen. There is a whole nother narrative developing within the church, and we're told that that's what's going to happen. Everything, all the pieces are in play right now. We just lack that little clink, and then it's that quick. So you have to be trained. You have to be ready at any moment. So now we're just looking at this as former rain, early rain, warming up for what's coming. So that's why we've been doing all of this stuff. Not that you're going to remember, every single thing. Your binder's almost this thick, right? Not that you're going to remember all this. It's just like the code book when I took my code test. When I first, started fooling around with electricity and wanted to get my license, and I thought you had to memorize the code book. And I was like, whoa, there's no way. But then I realized, it's an open book. And that means you don't have to remember everything in the code. You have to know where to find it. That's how you pass the test. Know where it's at. Know how to find the index. Know the topics. That's all that I'm giving you. This binder is your code book. And you're going to know where to go through this thing to find the answers. It's going to be like an appendix, kind of like a research tool for you when you're on this topic to have the answers. Where to go back and research. Your Bible studies that you're going to be sharing with people are going to be your guide. You're going to have 10 Bible studies you can share, and I'm developing the sanctuary Bible studies. I'm just behind on them. So you're going to have both. You're going to have the gospel, and then you're going to have the sanctuary studies that's based on the stuff that we've been doing in Module 2. And between those two, you're going to have all kind of, with your doctrinal Bible studies, you're going to have so much to study with people. It's going to be fun. You're going to have a lot of things to share with them. If you know they're not ready and they're kind of stumbling, some people are doctrinally ready and you can just zip right through the doctrines. Some people are a little slow and they're a little hesitant. Well, then you can just kind of, for a while, focus on the gospel with them. And so there's all these options, but the point is you being in practice of spreading this gospel and actually being disciples. I used to worry about this when I was young, thinking to myself, only pastors are safe. They're the only ones giving Bible studies. Ain't we all supposed to do that? And when I hear that kind of stuff, that we're all supposed to be sharing the gospel, how do you do that? I went with this one guy. I was working on the construction site. He was a Baptist preacher. And so we took break that morning, and there was a grocery store right across, a little convenience store right across the highway there. So we all took break and walked across the store, and he was a little short Baptist pastor. And I never forget, he walked into there, and there was obviously this Middle Eastern. And he went into his preacher voice, like John Hagee, and asked him if he knew the Lord Jesus Christ, and went into this spiel, and it was so awkward and so strange. And I remember thinking, if that's what spreading the gospel is, and later we had this conversation, that's how we spread the gospel. And I thought, well, that's so inefficient and so weird. The poor guy behind the counter was so freaked out by that. And it was just so theatrical and weird. And I thought, well, how do people spread the gospel? How do we become disciples? Well, this is how. You find the people closest to you, just like the disciples did, in everyday environments. Some of you are going to be hardcore door knockers. Some of you are going to be people that take responses that the Bible worker gathers. Some of you are just going to work with people that you know, and that's the most comfortable place to start. But it gives all of us an opportunity to be workers in some way, and that's what's fascinating, man. You get it, this group here, plus those of you that are watching, stayed at home in your pajamas. We will forgive you, but I know I got in so much trouble for that last year when I said that. But anyhow, if all of us will do this, God will bless this church. He really will. He'll bless us. He'll look and say, okay, this is a church that is, I'm going to show y'all the congregation and their pastor they're all preachers. They're all teachers. So that's what I'm after. And I think the church will just blossom and grow. I mean, right? I don't see a whole lot of other churches doing this at all. And I think that God has a willingness to bless churches that do this. So, without any more, we're going to get now into chapter 4 of our Christ in His Sanctuary, and the focus is going to be really on proving that the sanctuary, that's what these next few chapters are, proving that the sanctuary is a valid biblical idea, right? And it's not some quaint little concept that Adventists found in the book of Exodus and Leviticus and a few little quotes here and there, and we built this whole teaching out of it. It is everything. It is the Old Testament. And it is the realization of it's in the New Testament. So what you're going to have to do, because you're trying to explain one thing, right? All this that we're going through is to be able to explain the first angel. What in the world is the 2,300 years, the hour of His judgment, right? That is everything. To be able to explain that, you have to be able to show that this is a relevant, working idea. This is not some little, small, in-the-closet teaching. This is a big biblical teaching. And you have to be able to demonstrate that, because there is a movement out there that's been right along beside us as a church, shadowing, saying, there's no sanctuary in heaven, and this is not real, it doesn't matter, it's fake, that's been the constant trumpet. And people in our own denomination at times have cried out, there is no sanctuary in heaven. All at Calvary, all at the cross, Jesus went to heaven and that's it, and He's waiting to come back at a certain time when He chooses necessary. And they've dismissed. And of course, if you do that, then you just totally trash the three angels' message. You trash our function as a church. And we become Seventh-day Baptist. No difference. So, this whole lesson in 4, 5, and 6, and I'm not going to, some of it I'm assuming that y'all went through most of it, is going to be showing the validity of what happened here so that we'll understand what happened over here in the first angel, how this is fulfilled. So I want to go down to in the opening paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, down there at the fourth paragraph of your first page under chapter 4. And this is not a question, but it's something I wanted to bring up. She says, yet while it was not given to the prophets to understand fully the things revealed to them, they earnestly sought to obtain all the light which God had pleased to make manifest. They inquired and searched diligently, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ which was in them did signify. What a lesson to the people of God in the Christian age, for whose benefit these prophecies were given to His servants, unto whom it was revealed that not unto themselves, but unto us they did minister. Witness those holy men of God as they inquired and searched diligently concerning revelations given them for generations that were yet unborn. That means us. Contrast their holy zeal with the listless unconcern with which the favored ones of later ages treat this gift of heaven. What a rebuke to the ease-loving, world-loving indifference which is content to declare that the prophecies cannot be understood. So what do you think about that statement? What is it saying to you? The treatment of Bible prophecy today in light of the way in which it came to us and was given to us. The forefathers. Oh, when you raise your hand, it's like a bidding around here. We're like, go. All right, the prophecies were born and given to us in great expense, right? At great ridicule, great laughter. They gave up, they poured their funds, their farms, their lands, their money into the proclamation of it. They were laughed at. They spent nights and nights and nights in prayer and study. It came to us, birthed to us through great sacrifice. And here we are 178 years later or so. And it's just like, tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, not a big deal. Yeah, we know. And so this chapter opens up with, we really should be digging deeper, because some of these things, and some of you have intimated this to me, this is a lot of stuff, and it's difficult. And it is. It's supposed to be over our heads, but it's meant this class was only meant not to be definitive in everything, but to drive you into a deeper study. Just like our sermon today in Hebrews 7. Let's get into some deep waters. It's really technical language, but it's meant for you to dive into it and just drown where you drown and swim where you can swim, but you learn that way. And these lessons were meant to cause us to go just deeper and crave more and more. So our first question in the page, in this chapter, let's just go ahead and move to that as we go through this and see what your thoughts were. This is important stuff. I'm telling you, I'm giving you the stuff that you need to use. The questions are developed so that when you're trying to convince something to somebody, these are the questions that you need to ask, because these are biblical questions. And so the first question is, what prophecy did Jesus proclaim that the time is fulfilled? Remember when he says that? For the time is fulfilled. That's a huge statement in the New Testament. What time was he proclaiming is fulfilled? That's right. He's talking about the 70 weeks prophecy, but particularly, brother, you're correct, that those 69 weeks of the 70, remember we talked about, they're on. And this is fascinating. People don't know this. I'm telling you, these are the kind of, you need to put a star beside that and say, okay, when we get to the 70 weeks prophecy in my Bible study with someone, I'm going to go to that question where Jesus asked, the time is fulfilled. Because most people read that in the New Testament like, okay, the time is fulfilled. What time? And no one ever stops and think about that. But in Jesus' mind, this is why we do the whole 70 weeks prophecy. Not just to prove that He's our Messiah, but that Jesus understood the importance of prophetic time. And of course, if you establish that, you're establishing what? If you establish the 70 weeks soundly enough, you've automatically established the 2,300 years, and then you got a lock on the first angel's message. This is what people need to know. So he proclaimed that this time period of Messiah, Daniel, because he's constantly quoting Daniel all over the place. All right? And there's a reason why there has been a 100-year war against the book of Daniel by the higher critics in universities to say, Daniel was really written at the time of the Maccabees. Really wasn't written back then. There's always this, if you look, it's the book that's attacked the most of the Old Testament. Even Jewish rabbis that I have spoken to say Daniel is an illegitimate book. I'm like, oh, how convenient. The one book that really tells you who the Messiah is, you consider apocryphal now, although your forefathers never would do that. It's because it is revealing this 70 weeks prophecy. So, question number 2 is, what part of Daniel's 70-week prophecy did they most misunderstand? No, we're talking in the first century now, right? Yeah, see? Yeah, they still don't get that idea. So when you're looking at our 70 weeks, when you get down to, so we have 483 years, which is our 69. Then we get to the middle, right, of our 1 week. Let me get out of your way. This time period, in the middle of the week, right, that last week of the 70th week, the 490th, before it comes to conclusion, that middle of that last week, Messiah being cut off, it was right there in Daniel's writings. What else would that mean? Sure. Well, I think when he means that time is not yet, it's not time for him to die, because he can't die until 31 AD. That's why Satan's trying to kill him all over the place. It would destroy the prophecy. He's like, nope, 31 AD is when I expire. No, because when he says that, he is announcing Messiah's here. Daniel's 70th week. Yeah, Messiah has come. So they misunderstood this is important. Go ahead, Tim. Oh, very good. Go ahead and say it again.
There's a difference between being killed and giving yourself up as the sacrifice.
Right. A willing, sacrificial, different than being murdered or killed by the Romans, which we could get into that later, but good point, good point. So Messiah would be cut off. It's right there in Daniel's writings. They believed in Daniel. They were looking for the coming of the Messiah. They knew that Daniel had prophesied from the restoration of the temple. They were all good mathematicians. They knew Artaxerxes' decree when Nehemiah went back with Ezra. They knew when Zerubbabel went back. They knew that the latest it could be is 457. And they knew that it was the time of the Messiah to come. And they had all that down. How did they miss, but he shall be cut off, but not for himself, but for his people? And that's what this lesson is going. It's very important to establish as part of the lesson to give validity to what would happen down here at the second half of the prophecy, the disappointment. That's what this whole setup is to show that in the first century there was a disappointment. In the last century, in 1844, not the last, but there would also be a disappointment. To be able to shadow those are pretty important things to do. So it's important to show that there was a disappointment in the first century. That the disciples were expecting, that's what this lesson's going. That the disciples were expecting, they got the math of the prophecy right, but the application they got wrong. And at the 1844, when this prophecy comes to its fulfillment, the same thing. They had the math correct. The application was wrong. It's a perfect mirroring. And so these are things that you need to be able to bring up to people to give validity, because they're going to go online and the first thing they're going to do is punch in 1844, and you're going to see the disappointment, and some goofball that doesn't understand a thing about anything is going to say they were wrong. They predicted the end of the world. When in fact, we're going to look at it a little bit, many people got it right. We're going to look at that, but you've got to be able to help people understand the disappointment was predicted.
Disappointment. That's a pretty, because that was impressed on me when I was reading the story about Jesus, that was a disappointment. That was a pretty important disappointment. I mean, you believe that Jesus is going to reign as a king. He's going to release you from the Roman oppression, but he dies. They were so disappointed. They didn't even want to be found. They went into hiding.
Excellent point. Keep these thoughts going. Keep these thoughts going. Go ahead. Oh. Okay. Oh, he is shaking hands. See, you can't move your hand around here. A mic going to be right in your face. Okay. So what misunderstanding did the disciples have about the first coming of Jesus? What did they think the 70 weeks prophecy was going to bring them to? Yeah, they thought he was coming to establish what kind of... Oh, this is so good. An earthly kingdom. It's so interesting that in 1844 they get it reversed. It's the same kind of disappointment. So he was coming, they thought that Messiah was coming to set up the kingdom of glory. But he's not. He's coming. We're going to see that he's coming to set up a different kingdom first. And so they was thinking of an earthly empire, so their attention was all here on the earth. So what are the two kingdoms that Jesus came to set up, and what are the differences between the two in relation to time? So the kingdom of what? And the kingdom of? Right. Kingdom of grace was set up when? Right. And the kingdom of glory, second coming. So 1844 was to prepare them for the kingdom of glory. And so there was a kingdom of grace and a kingdom of glory. Yeah, so the kingdom of glory is set up at the second coming. 1844 was to prepare the world for the kingdom of glory. The kingdom of grace is what he came to set up on earth. So there's these two kingdoms, and the Jews got them all mixed up and conflated and backwards. And Maybe a philosophical point of view, yes.
Will there be another disappointment when Jesus comes? Like when Jesus comes, will people be disappointed and hide under the rocks?
We're going to get to that later in the lesson. There's a point that comes out in the lesson in a little bit that we ask that question. You know, what? Right now, because the world don't want him to come. There's a song, I love it. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to go right now. Oh, they're having too much fun, you know. Okay, so y'all got that. That was pretty good. So we're just showing now that the lesson is just trying to show you that there was a disappointment in the first century. So the lesson of 1844 is the next subheading. Again, if y'all have anything in these chapters that as we're flipping through these headings that you want to talk about that's not in the questions, please feel free to do that. So now we go to the lesson of 1844. The first question: in what ways was the preaching of Miller? That's spelled terribly wrong. It's spelled like a Southeast Texan, Miller. In what ways was the preaching of Miller similar to that of the disciples? Yeah, so think about this. When Jesus said the time is fulfilled, what was Miller saying? Same thing, the time is fulfilled. The disciples preached the first coming, the time is fulfilled, and then Miller's like, whoa, the time is fulfilled. The second half of the prophecy has come true. And so it was the same kind of preaching. In what ways was the disappointment of the disciples similar to that of William Miller? What was the misunderstanding in 1844? Yeah, so there was a disappointment too, right? Right, they thought he was coming to set up his kingdom at that time. So there was a disappointment also in the first century, in the 19th century. So what was the mistake that William Miller made in his understanding of the 2300 years? Yeah, see, this is where we got to really start gearing towards and helping people understand what took place and what happened so that the message is not chalked up as some goofy mistake that a church made and we did some kind of weird scriptural thing to validate it. We got to show clearly, and I think I have it, yes, at the end of this, I don't know if I have it in your notes, but Revelation chapter 10 is the prophecy of the disappointment. It can be nothing else. We did a whole Bible lecture here, a sermon on Revelation 10, that it was prophesied that there would be a disappointment and that they would have to go again and preach to many people, and God allowed that really for the same reason why He allowed it in the first century, to find out who the true... Go ahead.
No one knows the time and the hour when Christ shall come. Looking at that, William Miller actually studied the Word of God from cover to cover. So how could that, right?
Well, he just did. But we're going to look at why he did. Because if you read in your notes, it's clear, Ellen White says God put His hand on them on purpose. He hid those things from them so they would make the mistake. I know people are like, oh, how convenient of y'all to say that. But we have Revelation 10, and then we have all this other evidence to corroborate that God was allowing the mistake to be made because He's weeding out. Like, what does it say? That God will not, He will send a strong delusion that they should believe a lie because they did not have a love of the truth. God is not going to let someone get to heaven on a technicality because they understood some mathematical truth. He wants to see people's hearts. You know, if the disciples went through a disappointment, it's clear that everyone's going to go through disappointment. But go ahead.
Well, it's the old deal about fire purifies gold. and persecution purifies the saints. And that's, in other words, you find out who is really wanting to be close to God, who wants to.
Right. We're about to get a good taste of that in the very near future.
The disciples made the mistake of believing a popular belief. And even though Christ said it to their face that he's going to die, they didn't believe it. They thought he was going to set up the earthly kingdom. Miller did the same thing. He took a popular belief that the sanctuary was the earth. And there's nowhere it says in the Bible that the earth is a sanctuary. And he finally figured that out. But it was after 1844.
Very good point, right? The earth was the courtyard, but they would not figure that out till later.
In Revelation, is this the same disappointment, Revelation 10, that's spoken of in the book of Daniel, where it says you'll have the little book and it'll be sweet in your mouth, and then it turns bitter?
Yeah, this is how we know. The connection between Revelation 10 and Daniel is,
Okay.
you can't miss it.
Sure that
John's picking up on that
I was
language,
following you.
saying
Okay.
that book that God told Daniel to seal that had all the prophecies in it.
Yeah.
In John, in Revelation, he's opening that book, he's eating it, it's sweet, but when it hits his belly, it's bitter. And you know when something's bitter in your belly, you're sick, you're vomiting, you're upset, you're throwing up. But then he says, but go and prophesy again to many nations, tongues,
And that's the time we're in right now.
yeah, we're
Okay.
well, we're going to see in a minute. We're in the Tarian time.
Okay.
So, what was the cleansing in your study of this section? What did the cleansing of the sanctuary actually turn out to be? From the heavenly. Did y'all get that? The sanctuary to be cleansed. They realized it could not be the one on the earth because where was the one on earth? What would happen to it? Been gone for 2,000 years. There was no temple. Right. There was no sanctuary. And the world's still waiting for that sanctuary to be built. And God allowed the dome of the rock to be put right there where it is to not let it happen. Right? So they realized that the sanctuary that was to be cleansed, and then, of course, this is where your lesson goes, out of the book of Hebrews, they realized there was a sanctuary in heaven. And that sanctuary in heaven was the one to be cleansed. Now, our chapter is just going to be helping us understand what that cleansing meant. And we're just following good biblical exegesis now. So how does the cleansing of the sanctuary relate to the first angel's message of Revelation 14, verse 6? Yeah, Revelation 14:6 proclaims, this is the first angel's message. Revelation 14, actually 6 and 7, proclaims the hour of God's judgment. And we've learned, if you learn from the chapter, in the Old Testament, the day of judgment was the cleansing of the sanctuary, Yom Kippur. It was a time where God begins to investigate the record books of heaven. We're going to look at that again. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But Revelation 14, 6 and 7, the first angel's message, the hour of God's judgment, makes no sense outside of the sanctuary. It just has no relevancy. And that's why people read it and they're like, oh yeah, God's judgment's coming. But no, that's specific, a specific time period that the book of Daniel prophesied would take place. In the year 1844, the judgment hour of God would begin, according to the feast day of the Day of Atonement. And when that feast day would be proclaimed, like the heavenly idea of it, God would raise up a church, raise up a people identified in Revelation chapter 12 and Revelation 14 to tell the world, hey, Daniel's prophecy has come true. The first part happened, right? This is so easy to do. The mathematics are perfect. You cannot refute them. That means the end of the prophecy is just a matter of counting. Something happened in 1844. If you ask people, well, what happened in the year 1844? Okay, maybe you Adventists are wrong. Something else? Well, you tell me what cosmologically or in the heavens took place in the year 1844. Just look at a timeline of what took place in the year 1844. And you'll find one thing that was going on around the globe at the end of the Second Great Awakening. It was the preaching of the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy. All over the globe it was taking place.
I got a question. So when Christ died on the cross, he went into the holy place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after 1844, the investigative judgment began. He went into the most holy place to cleanse the sanctuary. And that's when he's going through the books so we get our seals, right? Whether we are counted worthy through obedience and our faith, whether we end in the kingdom of heaven, right?
Well, whether we have claimed the righteousness of Christ as my own by faith, the obedience is a sign or an evidence of that. But as we're going to look in the sanctuary message, it tells us what he's doing. We don't have to guess about it. We can clearly see that when he died, Hebrews is so abundant. If you know Hebrews, we've been going over it ad nauseum in church, right? Every chapter, we keep talking about our high priest. It's just everywhere. When he died, when he left Calvary, when he left the courtyard, which was the earth, represented, in all of this, it says he ascended and went and sat down by the right hand of the Father. He entered into, Paul says, the holy place. And he began that work of becoming our high priest, administering righteousness to those who come to him by faith. And then the gift of the Holy Spirit in return to help them live an obedient life. That process begins in 31 AD. But in 1844, it makes sense. This is what we've been kind of studying, that as the high priest once a year moved into this special work. That's the idea of what Christ is doing.
I think it's interesting as I'm listening to all of this is that the disciples, had the disappointment, and they were allowed to have that disappointment and go through the disappointment. And once they went through that disappointment and figured out where they were wrong, now it was time for them to go tell the world and go and preach. And so in 1844, we were allowed to go through the disappointment. But once we realized where our mistake was, now we are to go tell the world.
Right. The information is so overwhelming. We're going to look at historically how the early Adventists, before they were Seventh-day Adventists, what they were doing. They were just killing people with this. They took paper charts with a pen or pencil and just wrote it out, and people are like amazed. There has to be a reason for this 1844. You can't just say the most amazing prophecy was fulfilled in Christ, but then this has no application. It's just, it really strains a person's credulity to say nothing happened. But the reason why the world don't want to admit that is because it identifies a church, a particular group at the end of time that would be proclaiming it, and the world hates that. And I don't want to get into hubris or our pride about that, but I'm saying that this is the end-time message. And while we are wanting to go out and copy in the Baptists and everyone else today, I just can't understand it when we got this.